Have you ever had to make a decision that would break your heart? What if that choice involved the life of someone you love? Now imagine that this someone is not a person, but a helpless cub, a little bear that depends completely on you. A family was about to make the most painful decision of their lives, saying goodbye to their bear cub, believing there was no more hope. But fate, always unpredictable, had other plans. In the wild, where survival is a cruel game, every choice can be the difference between life and death. The relentless cold of the mountains, the loneliness of the forests, and the daily struggle against the unknown are part of the reality for many animals. Bear cubs, fragile and vulnerable, are constantly challenged by nature, and sometimes by humans themselves. But every now and then, a story emerges to defy all odds, to remind us that hope can shine even in the darkest of times. This story begins in a setting of ice and biting wind, where a small bear fought against the forces of nature. His human family did everything they could to help him, but when his strength began to fade and every step felt like an unbearable burden, the harsh reality set in. Maybe it was time to let him go. Heartbroken, they made the decision to euthanize him, believing they were sparing him from further suffering. But something extraordinary was about to happen. Something no one could have predicted. What this puppy did at that crucial moment changed everything, and proved that sometimes animals have strength we can't even imagine. You need to watch this story until the end because what happened next was simply unbelievable. Before continuing this unbelievable story, I need to make a special request. If you've made it this far, it's because this story has already touched your heart, and I guarantee that what comes next will move you even more. So, before you get lost in the details of this surprising twist, take this moment to subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell real stories of incredible rescues, moving human-animal connections, and moments that prove compassion can change destinies. By subscribing, you become part of this community that values life, that believes in the impossible, and that is moved by each new story. And don't forget to leave your comment. What would you do if you were in this family's shoes? Would you have made the same decision? Your opinion is very important, and I want to know what you think. Now, brace yourself, because what happened next was breathtaking. The piercing wind blew mercilessly over the white expanse of the icy forest. In the heart of a remote region, where temperatures can drop to deadly levels and the snow never seems to melt, lived a family accustomed to the brutality of nature. They knew that there, in the wild expanse, life and death danced in a fragile balance, but nothing could prepare them for what was about to happen. It was on a gray and silent morning that they found Nanook. The little bear cub was huddled among the twisted branches of a fallen tree, his fur covered in snow, and his eyes half closed from the cold and exhaustion. He trembled, almost without strength, as the blizzard hissed around him. For a moment, the man who found him hesitated. I knew that interfering with nature was a risk, but then Nanook raised his head with a visible effort and let out a weak moan, not of threat, but of despair. And it was in that moment that everything changed. The cub's survival instinct met human compassion. The family didn't have the courage to leave him there, alone, at the mercy of fate. They knew that bear cubs without their mother's protection would rarely survive. If he was lost, his mother might never come back. If he was an orphan, there would be no future for him there. Carefully, they wrapped the little one in a thick blanket and took him home. In the first few weeks, Nanook surprised everyone. He recovered quickly, adapting to life with his family as if he had always belonged to that home. His every movement exuded a mix of curiosity and innocence. His eyes lit up whenever he received hot food, or when he cuddled up by the fireplace to escape the cold outside. To family members, he wasn't just a recovering bear. He became part of their routine, a silent but powerful presence that warmed their hearts in the midst of the relentless winter. But then, something started to change. At first, it was just small signs. Nanook, once so energetic and curious, began to become quieter. His breathing seemed heavier. He slept for long periods and no longer played like he used to. At first, the family attributed it to the cold, to natural changes in behavior. But they soon realized that something was wrong. The little bear's eyes no longer had the same shine. His movements became slow, heavy. Appetite decreased, and then he started refusing to eat. Fear took over the house. What could be happening? Not knowing what to do, the family sought help from a local veterinarian, an experienced man who understood wildlife and had dealt with rescued animals before. But when he examined Nanook, his countenance became grave. Exams revealed that the puppy was weaker than they imagined. Your body was not absorbing nutrients as it should, and your health could deteriorate quickly. The veterinarian, with years of experience, got straight to the point. Nanook might not have much time left. It was a devastating blow. The family, who had already become attached to the puppy, felt their hearts sink at that possibility. The idea of seeing him waste away, suffering, was unbearable. It was then that the vet suggested something that made them shudder: euthanasia. "He may be in more pain than he's letting on," the vet said, his voice heavy. "Sometimes the most compassionate act we can do for an animal is to let it go without pain." Silence took over the house. The family exchanged glances, unable to believe that they had reached this point. From the day they found Nanook, they did everything they could to save him. They saw him grow, become stronger, achieve small moments of happiness. Now they had to decide whether to give up on him. It was an impossible choice. The dilemma took hold of each one. On the one hand, logic said that keeping him alive could be a selfish decision. What if he was really suffering? What if he never recovered? But on the other side, something inside them screamed that it wasn't time yet. They had seen Nanook fight. They had witnessed his resilience since the day they found him, frozen, in the middle of the storm. He had overcome challenges before. Wouldn't it be unfair to deprive him of a chance now? Time was short. Every minute counted. The family was faced with one of the most difficult decisions of their lives. And so, the next morning, with heavy hearts, they made their decision. Nanook would be taken to the vet that same day. The car has been prepared. The puppy, unable to resist, was placed carefully in the back seat, wrapped in his favorite blanket. The silence inside the vehicle was suffocating. Every kilometer traveled felt like a painful goodbye. But then, something unbelievable happened. The road seemed longer than ever. The car's engine purred softly, contrasting with the heavy silence that dominated the environment. The sky was cloudy, as if nature itself reflected the sadness of that early farewell. Inside the car, the family could barely look at Nanook. The bear cub, so full of life when he arrived in that house, now seemed a shadow of his former self. His fragile body barely moved under the thick blanket that covered him, and his breathing, although constant, sounded weak, almost imperceptible. The man behind the wheel pressed his fingers against the leather of the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening from the force of the pressure. His wife, in the passenger seat, looked out the window, her eyes fixed on the icy landscape that slid along the road. In the back seat, the children tried to hold back their tears, but it was useless. The pain of losing Nanook was too great to hide. What if there was another way? What if they were making a mistake? That was the question that echoed in everyone's mind. But at the same time, the other side of reality haunted them. The vet was clear. Nanook was suffering. The puppy no longer had the strength to get up, refused food, and spent more and more time motionless, as if his body was slowly giving up. They had done everything they could. They fed him the best foods, warmed him every night, tried every possible treatment. But in the end, it seemed like nature was winning. With each kilometer traveled, the tension in the car increased. The mother passed her hand over the cub's small paw, feeling the faint heat that still remained in it. The skin beneath the soft fur was cold, a cruel reminder of Nanook's fragility. The pain of seeing him like this was unbearable. It was then that the unexpected happened. Nanook, who had barely moved since being placed in the car, did something no one expected. With a visible effort, he lifted his paw and placed it gently on the hand of the man he was driving. The touch was so light that it almost went unnoticed, but the impact was immediate. The man looked at Nanook in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide. The cub stared back at him, and for a brief moment, his gaze wasn't that of a sick, powerless animal. It was a look filled with something deeper. something that begged for one more chance. The car continued for a few more meters, but doubt had settled like a storm inside the man's chest. His wife noticed the hesitation in his gaze and, without saying anything, took his hand. The children stopped crying for a moment, watching silently, as if they knew something was about to change. And then, without warning, the man braked the car sharply. The sound of tires sliding over the icy asphalt cut through the silence. Everyone's hearts accelerated. The air inside the car felt heavy, charged with emotion. The man took a deep breath and looked at his wife, then at his children. "I can't do this." His voice was hoarse, choked. The wife felt a lump in her throat, her eyes filled with tears. "He is sure?" he asked, knowing that deep down the answer was already there. The man nodded, running a hand over his face to wipe away the tears that threatened to fall. "I can't give up on him. Look at him. He's still fighting." The children looked at each other, and suddenly the crying returned. But this time, it wasn't just sadness. It was hope. The man spun the car, making a sharp turn on the snow-covered road. They would no longer go to the veterinary clinic. Nanook would have one more chance. Back home, the atmosphere inside the car was different. The weight of the decision was still there, but now mixed with a spark of hope. If Nanook had shown a sign that he still wanted to fight, who were they to take that chance away from him? The next few days were pure dedication. The family intensified their care, looking for any alternative that could bring Nanook back to life. They sought help from other specialists, sought natural remedies, and adjusted their diet. But nothing could be more powerful than what motivated Nanook to continue: the unconditional love he received from his family. He was still weak, still needed time to recover, but there was something different in his gaze. He wanted to live. He wanted to fight. And now everything depended on what would happen in the next few days. Now tell me, what would you do in this situation? Would you have made the same decision as this family? Comment, "I'd give it one more chance," if you also believe that every life deserves an opportunity to fight. Let's go on this journey together. And if you want to follow every detail of this exciting story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. The car inched along the snow-covered road, each meter covered feeling like silent torture for everyone inside the vehicle. The monotonous sound of the engine filled the space, drowning out the choking sobs of the children in the back seat. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. Or at least that's what everyone tried to convince themselves. With each curve, with each tire mark left in the soft snow, the veterinary clinic approached, and with it, the moment that everyone feared, saying goodbye to Nanook. The bear cub, who once ran around the house with contagious energy, now lay motionless under a thick blanket, eyes half open, breathing raggedly. The sparkle in his eyes, which once exuded curiosity and vitality, had faded. His small body barely moved, and the only thing that indicated there was still life there was the subtle rise and fall of his weakened chest. With each kilometer traveled, the family's hearts tightened more. The mother turned her face to the window, unable to look at the cub lying there, weak, helpless. She felt a crushing weight on her shoulders, a mix of pain and doubt. Were they doing the right thing? Or were they giving up too soon? The father kept his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind was far away, struggling internally. He wanted to believe he was making the best decision. He wanted to believe that alleviating Nanook's suffering was an act of love. But deep down, something inside him screamed that it wasn't time yet. The snow fell slowly, covering the world outside with a silent white veil. The winter was relentless in that remote region, and that same cruel nature that made survival so difficult was also what made the family know that, as much as they loved Nanook, they might not be able to save him. The vet had been clear. There wasn't much more to be done. The cub was already too weak, and keeping him alive could only mean prolonging his suffering. In the back seat, the children held back tears, but their eyes shone with a sadness that no words could describe. The smallest of them held the corner of the blanket that covered Nanook, as if trying, in some way, to transmit to the cub a last vestige of human warmth before the inevitable goodbye. No words were said. No sounds other than the engine and the snow crunching under the tires. Just pain. It was then that something unexpected happened. In the midst of that absolute silence, an almost imperceptible movement broke Nanook's rigidity. With a visible effort, the puppy raised its small paw and, trembling, extended it towards the man behind the wheel. His thick fingers held the steering wheel tightly, but he felt when that fragile paw lightly touched his hand. The touch was faint but significant. The man looked in the rearview mirror and for a moment forgot how to breathe. Nanook stared at him. His eyes, previously empty and dull, now seemed filled with something different. It wasn't just pain. It wasn't just tiredness. It was as if, in that look, there was a silent request, a plea. The cub couldn't speak, couldn't express his emotions like a human would. But in that moment, with that small and powerful gesture, he was saying everything. The man felt his chest tighten. He knew that look. It was the same look Nanook had on the day he was rescued, when he was still a small piece of life lost in the snow, shivering in the cold, without a mother to protect him. It was the look of a being who still wanted to live. The man's hand shook on the steering wheel. He blinked several times, trying to stay focused on the road, but his mind was already taken over by the whirlwind of emotions. His wife noticed his hesitation, his uneven breathing, and looked at him. He didn't need to say anything. She had seen it too. The children, who until then had been submerged in their sadness, realized what was happening. The smallest of them leaned closer to Nanook and, in a trembling voice, whispered, "He still wants to fight." The sentence pierced the air like an invisible blade. The silence in the car changed. It was no longer a silence of resignation, of farewell. It was a silence filled with possibility, a silence filled with hope. The man felt a lump form in his throat. What were you doing? How could I just accept that sentence without even trying one last time? He turned the steering wheel hard, pulling the car to the side of the road. The vehicle slid slightly in the snow, but soon stopped, leaving only the sound of the wind outside. His heart was beating fast. He looked at Nanook, then his wife, then his children, and then he let out a heavy sigh, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I can't do it," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't give up on him now." The wife closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing those words, and when she opened them again, a different glow was there. "Then let's not give up," she whispered. The children's eyes lit up through their tears. The man took a deep breath, put the car in reverse, and turned the car. They would no longer go to the veterinary clinic. They would return home. All the way back, the atmosphere inside the car was no longer the same. The fear was still there. The uncertainty still accompanied them. But now there was something more, something that previously seemed distant. There was hope. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside that car a new destiny had been set. The decision to give up was left behind. Nanook's fate was not yet sealed, and now everything would depend on what happened next. Now I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in this family's shoes? Would you also have given Nanook one last chance? Comment, "I believe in hope," if you think every life deserves an opportunity to fight. Let's go on this journey together. And if you want to know what happened after this unbelievable moment, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this exciting story. The car cut through the snow-covered road like an arrow returning to its point of origin. The silence, previously filled with farewell, now carried a different weight. It was tension. It was hope. It was a thread of possibility that no one dared to break. The decision had already been made. They would give Nanook one more chance. But was there still time? Did that little cub, so fragile and exhausted, still have the strength to fight? The wife looked at her husband from time to time, as if trying to absorb the reality of what they were doing. In the back seat, the children remained silent, but it was no longer a silence of pain. It was a silence of expectation, of faith in the unlikely. Nanook continued to lie on the blanket, his small, thin body moving slightly with each breath. But something had changed. He no longer seemed completely left to his fate. The soft touch of his paw on his guardian's hand, that look filled with something inexplicable, still echoed in everyone's minds. When they finally arrived home, the man turned off the car and remained for a moment with his hands firmly on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. He knew this was his last chance to save Nanook. What if it failed? What if all that was just an illusion created by the desperation of not wanting to let him go? But then, he turned to the back seat and saw his children looking at him with expectant eyes. "Let's save him," he said, more to himself than to the others. The car door opened, and with all the care in the world, he picked up Nanook in his arms. The cub was weak, his breathing still ragged, but there was something in his expression that the man couldn't ignore. This was not an animal that had given up. He still wanted to live. The first challenge was warming it up. The cold of the relentless winter had sapped her strength, and her small body desperately needed warmth. They prepared a warm bath, enough to give the puppy the temperature his body needed so much. The water touched his fur, covered in snow and ice, and Nanook let out a small sigh, as if, for the first time in a long time, he found some relief. The mother held his head affectionately, while the children, sitting around the improvised bathtub, looked attentively, hoping that that simple gesture could make a difference. After his bath, they wrapped him in thick towels and took him to a cozy corner of the house near the fireplace. The warmth of the crackling fire filled the room, and for the first time in days, Nanook seemed to relax a little. But that was just the beginning. They knew that heat alone would not be enough. His small body needed nourishment, needed to regain strength if he was to fight the weakness that dominated him. But that would be one of the biggest challenges. Nanook hadn't been eating properly for days. His body refused food, and this pushed him to the limit of resistance even faster. His mother prepared a special mixture of warm milk and nutrients, trying to get him to drink some. The cub looked at the bowl hesitantly, his energy reduced to a minimum. The family held their breath, waiting. Then, with a little effort, Nanook moved his head and licked the surface of the liquid. It was just a sip, but it was enough to rekindle hope in everyone's hearts. From that moment on, the real battle began. The family took turns at night to make sure Nanook was never alone. Each small advance was celebrated as a great victory. The first time he accepted a little more milk, the moment he managed to lift his head without help, the first clumsy attempt to move. Every step, no matter how small, was a sign that he was struggling. The days dragged on, and the worry was still constant. There were moments when the fear returned, when Nanook spent hours without moving, when his gaze seemed too far away. But then came the moments that refilled hope. The little moans that indicated he still had strength. The way he snuggled close to the heat of the fireplace. The eyes that, little by little, began to shine again with a trace of life. The father, who was initially reluctant to believe there was a chance, now found himself looking at Nanook with a mixture of pride and admiration. That little cub had been through so much, and yet he was there, fighting every day to survive. The connection between them became stronger and stronger. Nanook was no longer just a rescued bear. He was part of the family, and the family wasn't willing to give up on him so easily. Every night was a battle. Every dawn was a test of endurance. But with each passing day, Nanook showed that he was willing to continue fighting. The family knew there was still a long way to go. There were still no guarantees. But for the first time in a long time, hope seemed stronger than fear. If you were in this family's shoes, would you have made the same choice? Comment, "I would never give up," if you believe that every life deserves a second chance. And if this story has already touched your heart, leave a like to help this video reach more people who believe in the power of hope. The days that followed were a real battle against time. The family dedicated themselves completely to Nanook, monitoring every small sign of improvement and celebrating every tiny achievement. The nights were long, marked by short naps and attentive glances. The father woke up several times during the night to check if Nanook was still breathing, fearing that, at any moment, his fight would come to an end. His mother prepared nutritious broths, looking for alternatives so that he could accept food without rejecting it. The children took turns at the puppy's side, whispering words of encouragement, stroking his soft fur, and hoping he felt the love that surrounded him. With each new day, hope grew. At first, It was just subtle signs, a movement of the ear, a more attentive opening of the eyes, a small adjustment in position when lying down. Then came the moments of greatest emotion, the first sip of water taken with greater desire, the first meal eaten without effort, the first truly conscious look since he'd been rescued for the second time. The family's hearts were filled with joy, and at the same time, with caution. They knew they couldn't celebrate too soon, but it was impossible to ignore that Nanook was fighting with all the strength he had left in his small body. Time passed, and then, something that no one expected happened. The moment that seemed impossible has finally arrived. One cold morning, when the sun could barely break through the cloudy sky, Nanook, who was still lying by the fireplace, began to move differently. His eyes opened faster than normal, and there was something new in them, a sparkle that hadn't been there before. The cub raised its head, looked around, and for the first time in weeks, tried to stand up. The father, who was watching everything closely, held his breath. The mother stopped what she was doing and ran to see. The children put down their toys and approached in silence, their hearts beating fast. They knew this was a decisive moment. Nanook tried. His small body shook with exertion, his legs still too weak to support him. But he didn't give up. With impressive determination, he made another attempt, then another. He fell a few times, his body still unaccustomed to movement, but his desire to get up was greater than any obstacle. And then, against all expectations, he did it. The bear cub, which a short time ago seemed doomed, stood up. His legs still wobbled, his balance was unstable, but he was there, defying all predictions, proving that there was still life inside him. Emotion took over the family. The mother put her hands to her face, unable to contain her tears. The father smiled like he hadn't smiled in a long time. The children cheered, holding back tears of joy as they watched Nanook take her first tentative steps. The scene was almost unbelievable. He moved with difficulty at first, but with each step he seemed to gain more confidence. What was once just a timid effort soon became a determined walk. And then came the moment that no one expected. As if a spark had been ignited within him, Nanook looked at his family and with a mischievous gleam in his eyes jumped. It was a small leap, but full of meaning. It was as if he said, "I'm back." The family's hearts almost exploded with emotion. They looked at each other, absorbing that moment, recording every detail in their memories. They had made the right choice. Against all odds, Nanook was there, alive, strong, being reborn before his eyes. What once seemed like a goodbye now turned into a true miracle. The following days were marked by an impressive recovery. Nanook began to eat better, his steps became firmer, his energy gradually returned. He no longer spent as much time lying down, and the sparkle in his eyes only grew. Soon he was running around the yard, playing like a healthy puppy should. The mother watched emotionally, remembering the moment she believed she would never see that little being running again. The father, who had been so hesitant to give him another chance, now couldn't contain his pride when he saw the bear strong and full of life in front of him. The children, who never stopped believing, could now finally play with Nanook like they did before. The family realized a great truth. Sometimes all someone needs is one last chance. And now I want to hear from you. If you were in this family's shoes, would you have believed until the end? Comment, "I would always believe," if you think that every life deserves a second chance. Oh, and don't forget to leave your like so that this story of overcoming reaches more people and inspires even more hearts. The winter continued relentlessly outside, covering the forest with a thick layer of white snow. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying the distant sound of branches cracking under the weight of the ice. But inside that house, a different heat took over the environment. It wasn't just the heat from the crackling fireplace, nor the thick blankets spread across the furniture. It was a warmth that came from something much bigger, the feeling of gratitude for seeing Nanook standing, strong, healthy, contrary to all predictions. The bear cub, who had once been on the verge of death, now ran around the snow-covered yard, his paws sinking slightly into the soft ground with each step. His fur, once dull and lifeless, now gleamed in the dim sunlight. His eyes, which had once reflected pain and exhaustion, now carried a vivacity that no one believed they would ever see again. He played, turned around, gently bit a branch, as if he was rediscovering the world around him. The family watched the scene with admiration. Each of them remembered the moment they believed they would never see that little bear like that again. The father crossed his arms and smiled at his wife, who was holding a hot cup in her hands. The children, who had spent so many nights with Nanook, were thrilled to see him run again. The impossible had happened. It was then that an idea began to take shape in his father's mind. He looked at Nanook, then his wife, and finally his children. "We need to take him to the vet." The sentence was met with a brief silence, not because it didn't make sense, but because no one wanted to go back to that place, to that moment when they almost gave up. But the father knew that this was necessary. They needed to show the vet what had happened. They needed to prove that they were right in believing until the end. The next morning, the car was once again sliding along the snow-covered roads, but this time, the atmosphere inside the vehicle was completely different. There was no longer that weight in the chest. There was no longer the feeling of goodbye. Nanook was awake, curious, looking out the window as if he wanted to absorb every detail along the way. The difference was stark. When they arrived at the veterinary clinic, they were greeted by the same man who, weeks before, had told them there was no more hope. The vet greeted them with a wary look, not knowing what to expect. But when she saw Nanook, her expression completely changed. Silence took over the office. The vet leaned forward slightly, eyes widening as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. That's not possible," he muttered. He knelt down to examine Nanook more closely. He touched his thick fur, felt the strength in his muscles, observed his attentive, lively eyes. The cub was far from the frail, sickly animal he last saw. "How?" The vet's voice trailed off for a moment. "How did this happen?" The father smiled, crossing his arms. "We just gave him what he needed. Time, care, and love." The vet still looked shocked. He checked Nanook more closely, did quick scans, and shook his head in disbelief. "That's a miracle," he admitted. "I've never seen anything like this before." The family looked at each other, smiling. They knew that what had happened here was more than just luck. They had seen something that science cannot always explain. They had witnessed in the purest form possible the power of hope. "Love can be the strongest cure there is," said the mother with a sparkle in her eyes. The vet looked at her and nodded slowly. For the first time since the beginning of that journey, he didn't try to argue. He didn't try to rationalize what was before him. He just accepted it. And it was at that moment that the family made a decision. What they had done for Nanook couldn't just be a story to remember fondly. It couldn't just be an isolated event. They knew there were lots of other animals out there. Animals in danger, with no one to fight for them, with no one to give them a second chance. They had learned something powerful from that experience. They had discovered that sometimes, all a being needs to survive is someone to believe in it. And that's how their mission began. In the following days, the family began researching ways to help other animals in need. They spoke to experts, looked for organizations, studied more about rescues and care. They had gone through the most difficult experience of their lives and emerged from it transformed. Now they wanted to make a difference. And it all started because a little bear, about to be abandoned to its fate, decided to fight. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that love can change lives? Comment, "Love transforms," if you also think that every life deserves a chance. And if this story moved you, share this video and help more people believe in the power of hope. If this story touched your heart, then you already know how much every small gesture can make a difference in the life of an animal in trouble. What happened to Nanook wasn't just chance. It wasn't just luck. It was the result of an act of compassion, of a difficult decision that changed everything. This story is living proof that sometimes hope can overcome even the cruelest circumstances. How many lives could be saved if everyone believed in the power of second chances? What happened to Nanook wasn't just chance, It wasn't just luck. It was the result of an act of compassion, of a difficult decision that changed everything. This story is living proof that sometimes hope can overcome even the cruelest circumstances. And now, I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in this family's shoes? Would you have made the same decision? Would he have given Nanook one more chance, even when everything seemed lost? Comment, I would give it a second chance. It is believed that every living being deserves to fight for life. Your comment makes all the difference and helps this story reach more people. Here, we tell incredible stories of moving rescues, of bonds that go beyond words, of animals that defy the impossible and prove that compassion can transform destinies. Each interaction strengthens this community that believes in the power of love, persistence, and connection between humans and animals. Don't let this story go unnoticed. Share with someone who needs to hear this message right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue following stories that inspire and make a difference. Now tell me, what was the moment in this story that moved you the most? Write in the comments and let's spread this message of hope together.